y'all. Welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. You know, the show where I invite people virtually into the blog cabin to chat about life. And today we're chatting about homelessness. Now, we're not I knew I was going to get your name wrong. I already asked you before we went on, but I knew it. Rajni. She is an associate professor, and she's actually a PhD. I'm going to throw that out there. Congratulations to you.
Thank you. I just got promoted to professor recently, so
that's right. You story, yes. She's social justice education at Stetson University, and she's also the founder and executive director of the Poverty and Homelessness Conference. So welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit about yourself, and tell us how you got started into working with homelessness.
Well, thank you so much, Melissa, first of all, for having me and for doing this. What a beautiful, I just think it's wonderful that we're able to engage and share in conversation and that you highlight so many diverse voices on your show. So thank you again for having me today. I do have a Poverty and Homelessness Conference at Stetson University. And while it's called a conference, it really is more of a movement because it's kind of, the conference happens over one day, but then there are many connected pieces that unfold throughout the year, working with schools, working with community partners. It really is this kind of beautiful beacon of light and hope in the midst of all of the pain and daunting nature of poverty and homelessness, especially child poverty and homelessness in the US. And so the conference and movement is really an effort to bring diverse stakeholders together to talk about some of these challenging topics, to start to dig in to say, what are some of the systemic and structural issues that are causing this? And how can we in our own communities, really taking this grassroots approach, come together to come up with sustainable solutions to positively impact the lives of our children and our youth?
So how did you get involved in the research, first of all, research about it? And then, what made you decide, yes, I'm going to focus on homelessness?
Sure. So this is really, it's something in my own kind of family journey and lifeblood. And it is something very close to my heart. So even as a child, through various kinds of traumas and experiences, but then also having the opportunity as somebody who is young to really spend a lot of time in soup kitchens and shelters. And I was really raised by my amma and appa, mom and dad, to have this strong consciousness that poverty and homelessness doesn't have a single narrative. It can impact and affect anybody, right? From somebody who just lost everything in a hurricane to somebody who was born into the cycle of poverty. And we make it very hard in so many ways to kind of break out of that because of structural and systemic issues, to somebody who is battling addiction because of trauma in their own life, to domestic violence. And so really understanding kind of the diversity and breadth of homelessness as well. But then understanding also that we all have agency. We all have the opportunity, I think, to give back and to help each other out in our communities, to uplift one another. And so I know for my own folks, they were so grateful for so many people who helped us along the way in our journey. And so I was really taught with that same kind of mentality of giving back and uplifting. And for me, I'm a teacher at heart, an educator, former public school teacher. And before I moved into the university professorate world, and, even in education, always kind of uplifting and working with children and youth who so many times are in situations that are just, they're shameful that our nation is putting, children in these situations. The fact we have millions that are facing food insecurity. They don't know where they're going to get their next meal when we really have plenty to go around. So these are things I wrestled with, I think, as a child, asking a lot of big questions, wanting to find answers, not always finding answers, but realizing very early on that if we can do something, we should do something. And even if we don't, even if it starts in our own community, doing something can set off ripples. And if more and more folks collectively get involved to do good, that goodness just can grow and it can sustainably and positively impact lives. And so for me, this is really, it's part of my whole life's work. When I was a high school student, Melissa, I started building children's play centers and shelters. So one of the things that I noticed is a lot of homeless shelters do not have areas for children to just be kids. Right? They can be very chaotic places by nature because you have so many different situations people are facing and hardships. And so for kids, it was hard as a kid, right? Playing with friends, we didn't really have a space to go. So you're absorbing all of the trauma around you. If you had to do homework, sometimes there wasn't a place that was quiet where you could just sit and do homework or just be a kid. And in some of the urban shelters, you don't really have the outdoor space either, where some shelters have, playgrounds in the back so kids can kind of go there. But there's a lot of limitations in a lot of shelters just by the nature and context of where they're situated. And then on top of that, we know we have a extreme shortage of family emergency shelters across the United States. So, and the COVID-19 pandemic has, of course, exasperated and magnified all these issues.
Now, I'm going to pick up on one point that you were talking about being in the public school system, is that I was also a public school teacher as well.
Hey.
So I saw firsthand, like you said, how these children suffer. And a lot of people were like, well, why can't their parents do any better? And we have to educate that sometimes the parents are trying the best that they can, trying to do everything they can to get out of the state that they're in. But it just seems like every possible bad thing that could happen to them has happened all at one time that made them into this situation. It's not like they're not trying to get out of the situation.
Oh, absolutely. And I think these are some of the myths and stereotypes around homelessness too that we tend to have nationally, but then even, within states and communities where, people will often kind of equate homelessness with laziness and say, if they would just get a job. But I'm the vice president of the National Coalition for the Homeless. And so we do a lot of data and work and research around this. And I can tell you, it's almost 50% of people who are in homeless situations are working more than one job, and they are homeless. So some are working 2, even 3 jobs. And the reality is we have a severe lack of affordable housing, lack of a fair living wage, compounded with really lots of structural and systemic issues that exist that make it very hard, in a sense, to just survive. And then you add in something like the COVID-19, the pandemic, and it is really distressing to see the numbers in our communities that were already unacceptable before the pandemic, but now have continued to grow and surge even up to 40% increases in some communities. And we have millions of evictions also looming. So this is really, it's heavy, heavy stuff. And I think one of the first things we all have to do in our communities is to put humanity, or shared humanity, prioritize and put that back first, and to work very, very diligently to break these stereotypes that exist. I love what you said, Melissa, right? So many of the parents are doing the best they can, right? They are working hard. In the US, gender inequality also comes into this. We have many women with children who are single mothers, also tied into incarceration, lots of tangled webs here. But the women, are sometimes working those 2-3 jobs that I was talking about. And so they're doing the best they can to provide food on the table, to make sure they can stay with their child. One of the most, I think, really, really daunting kind of fears for so many of the moms I work with is having their kids taken away from them. There's this kind of real fear of that. And they have more than enough love, and they're doing their best to get those resources, right, best that they can. But we have some really difficult situations that are really systemic issues. A lot of times we look to just fix the people, but I say, no, we've got to fix these systems and structures that are keeping these social inequalities and growing these social inequalities in our world.
So let's talk about some of the things, some of the structures that needs to be fixed.
Yeah, I love that. So many, right? So many structures in so many different kinds of ways. So one, there's connections, even when we talk about poverty or homelessness, there are these connections to almost every other kind of facet of oppression, if you will, right? So even we can't talk about it without even bringing in racial equity and racial equity issues into play. Even when I mentioned evictions, the majority of the evictions right now in our country, it is like up to 80% are Black mothers, right, with children. So we can't have these, we tend to want to have these conversations in so many different silos, but the reality is we have to start to have these more intersectional conversations to see the overlaps. And those overlaps are often these roots of structural issues, right, that we start to see. So even things like racism come into play. Even I think about mental health. We do not do an adequate job in our country, in our communities and states, providing support for mental health. And, it is very real when someone is struggling in so many ways and doesn't have the public health resources they need. And it's always that question, right? In some cases, even addiction, right? A lot of folks will say, well, so many people who are in homelessness have addictions, right? But what's interesting is addictions are actually through every single socioeconomic class, right? First of all, and actually even magnified more when you start to look at data in the middle and upper class. But yet those in homeless situations or in low income situations are often very quickly judged. And here's the thing, what we find is sometimes there are people who didn't have those addictions, but they are in homeless situations, and homelessness has this sheer violence or layers of violence that comes with it. And they end up starting to kind of self-medicate or treat in ways, right, which can cause addictions. Now, that's not saying sometimes addictions are not also the cause of homelessness. You also have that. It gets kind of complex in its nature, right? But if you start to dig a little deeper, you start to see a lot of structural issues, the poverty issues, even environmental issues. So many folks who are in poverty and homeless situations, they have higher risk for asthma and are struggling with lung issues and struggles, right? I have asthma myself. It's not fun. And so many have higher risk and exposure to lead, through paints because of structures they're living in, through water contamination. You think about Flint, Michigan, what happened with water. So there's these environmental pieces that start to come in, and then we can get into schooling and education. And I would say that's one of the biggest, right? We see so many opportunity gaps in terms of access and opportunities. Children are provided based on socioeconomic status, right? And schools are often low-income schools. They're the first, for example, to get arts programs slashed. And yet, what we know is the arts are one of the most powerful kind of realms of education that offers so many 21st century skill sets our children and youth need, but especially children and youth who have trauma, the arts can have enormous benefits. So instead of giving that to them, we are taking that away structurally, right? And the standardized testing pressures, that adds to it. So it's a lot. I mean, it's just so many different, and I think that's why sometimes, you sometimes have this kind of apathy or people kind of break down because they say, I don't know where to start, right? There's so much that needs fixing in a sense in our world, so many fractures that are so deep. But yet, those fractures are not going to get better. And in fact, they are deepening and widening and growing in our nation. And that's not going to stop unless we, the people, get together and make it stop, right? We, the people, stand up.
Okay, so we're going to go to a quick commercial. When we come back, I want to touch on something that you talked about, the arts. Yes. And you know where that's going, but here's a quick commercial break.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joanna, and I would like to share with you a little bit about Shores of Grace, Shores Philly. It's a ministry located in Philadelphia. The portion of Shores that I volunteer for goes into Kensington, an area greatly impacted by homelessness and addiction. And we go and we take love, food, clothing, snacks, conversation. We believe that it is a way that we can meet people right where they are and show them the love of Jesus. We have seen lives changed in big ways and in small ways, and we have built wonderful relationships with the people in the community. We have big plans, more we'd like to do, and we would appreciate any support, either through prayer or through donation. If you would like to donate, you can go to shoresofgrace.com, and in the menu, click on Donate. We just ask that you put Philly in your donation comments. Thank you.
And we are back. Let's talk about the arts, because you actually have something that's pertaining to the arts that helps with homelessness.
I love it. So, so I would say, Melissa, for me, just on a personal note, right, the arts have, been one way I've been able to sustain myself in my own journey when I've had various traumas and hardship. So even as a child, I feel very blessed and lucky that I was able to find ways to express myself in healthy ways through poetry, through painting. And again, these were things for a long time, even poetry, that I kept kind of tucked away in my own private journals. I would doodle, and it was a way to stay resilient in ways, to find faith in ways, all of these things we need as humans. And as I grew and as an educator, I know the power of the arts firsthand. And I felt that all children, youth, they deserve opportunities to be immersed and to learn and to have these healthy outlets, right, in ways, and also to be able to find their voice. I think the arts allows us to find what we're passionate about. It allows us to use our voice in meaningful ways, right? Even I think about what you're doing here with your blog, that is an artistic form, right? Where you're having conversations, you're having to visually create something. And so many of our children and youth, again, going back to those structural issues, don't always have those opportunities. So for me, poetry is one way I really believe in. In addition to being a professor and being part of the National Coalition for the Homeless and a mother myself, I have 2 children. I am also an artivist. So an artist and an activist put together, right? An artivist. And I use my art as a way to really push forward a lot of social justice issues. And so I paint, I dabble in all sorts of kinds of sculpting, creativity, but one of my favorite things is poetry. And I love to write. And so, it really was the youth I work with that inspired me in so many ways, because I kept telling them, get your thoughts down on paper, right? And some it's about writing, some it's about performance, spoken word poetry, but whatever it is, find ways to take your pain, to take your scars, to find healing in some sort of way, to give healing to others by sharing in our own vulnerability and experiences. And so that really pushed me to say, it's time for me to get my poetry out there into the world, to launch it in a public way. And so this is my first collection of poetry. I'm so excited. It's called Teluminus. And I made up the word. I kind of talk about it in the very beginning of my book. It's a Sanskrit word, Tulu meaning rising. And Tulu is very much connected with water, and luminous connected with light. So this idea of water and light. And if you think about water and light, water can be such a healing source. In many ways, we all, in our mother's womb, right, we're floating around in a sense. Light, you think about sunlight and how sun is needed to nourish so many things in our life. But in that same way, right, water and light can also be destructive. You think about tsunamis. Hurricanes. Right now we have a hurricane that might be passing through soon in Florida. So we've been preparing, right? So you think about water in that sense as well. And light, the same thing. Even with homelessness, I think about sunlight. And in the summer in Florida, so many, just like during the winter months up north, where so many are weathering the weather, and we lose lives every year because of weather conditions. The sunlight can be so strong here. We lose lives because of, they get dehydrated, right? And heat exposure. And so it's really interesting. I play with this kind of juxtaposition, but ultimately it's a call to action for us to, all use our talents and ways to improve our world, to build healthier communities and schools. And so there's a lot of pieces of justice. There's a lot about kind of our shared humanity in this. There's a lot about healing, and a lot of it is I weave personal kinds of narratives, social issues, kind of weaving together a lot of different things, but all raw from my heart and soul. And I'm very, very excited to be able to share this. Now, of course, it came out during a pandemic, and so I didn't get to do my book readings yet or any of that. So I'm quite excited actually to be able to share even today with you. It feels very exciting. And I love all of the proceeds are being used to help youth in homeless situations and to promote the arts. So I have a number of projects that I lead in our community, mentoring programs for youth who are low-income youth of color, and wonderfully talented, beautiful children who really deserve these rich opportunities we're talking about. And so a lot of the mentoring programs do just that, trying to give them resources, opportunities, expand their views, help them to dream big and to achieve those dreams in ways, but also trying to work with the community for collective impact to dismantle lots of the stuff that exists that should not be existing, right? The stuff that is causing a lot of the pain. And so really working towards that. I also have a movement called Acts of Justice and Kindness. And I founded this and I co-direct it with a dear friend of mine, Felicia Benzo. And it is wonderful. We talk about empathy with children and youth. We talk about agency. How can they use compassion and kindness to also better our world, right? To improve our world. How do we, find ways to reconnect with each other? And while technology certainly has so many different pros, right, there are also challenges. And how do we remember the shared humanity? You start to watch so many news stories or just kind of in the media, how even folks who are in homelessness, our own brothers and sisters and human beings, are often dehumanized in ways. And it's really awful, right? And so I think part of the efforts in these projects is to get kids early on to tap into that shared humanity, to understand the power of empathy, the power of love, the power of agency, that we can all do something, right? With what we have, where we are situated, to positively impact our world. I really believe that, right? And when we come together, that power exponentially can grow. And I think that's quite exciting as well. And so I touch upon a lot of that in this book, and I'm excited. The proceeds, like I said, I use art as a way to support the projects that I'm doing now. And these poems they're definitely written on the page, but a lot of them are also for the stage, right? So they're meant to read aloud as well. I love spoken word as well. It's so much fun. I think it allows you to use your body and expression and vocal variety, and so much healing and hope in the arts, right? I love that about the arts.
So I'm going to put you on the spot right now. Would you consider reading one of your poems?
Oh, I would love to. It would be an honor. Thank you for asking that. Okay, let me look and see which one I want to read. This is quite exciting. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to find the right one. All of these I feel them in my heart, so I'm just trying to think. So this one is kind of fun because it is about kind of this idea of creativity. And since we are talking about the arts, it's kind of organically folded in that way. I'll read this one, and it's called Wings Spread Open. Clock towers joyously chime, unplugging to journey inward. I am stocked up on cough tea. Bundles of colored pens fill my hands with thirsty invitations from dusty sketchbooks. Parched spirit opens wide for Indra to flow through me. I guzzle raging thunderstorms. Let Gentle rainfall marinate on my lips. Midnight hair tickling my toes. Pulse navigating the way. Listening to quadrants pointing towards the sun. Creativity uncovers her eyes. Determined to find me after a protracted game of hide and seek. Ready or not, here I come, she trustingly bellows, and I awake from hibernation. Walk out of the shadows towards her voice, liberated from uncomfortable camouflaging, from twisting myself into sundry pretzel positions to fit inside of miniature closets, sandwiched between furniture and walls, bruising from being crushed, swaddled too tightly in curtains, breathing shallow and dreaming of air. I am now liberated. I walk towards her voice, unshackled and free, stretch my limbs and Tarzan yodel. Woo! Wearing a silver crescent smile, hibiscus garlands around my neck, reflecting the element of water, Swadhisthana. Feeling a spark below my navel, I swallow uncertainty, buckled up, wings spread open, diving into the depth of prayer of faith, invoking Varuna, I extend myself across oceans, Atlantic to my left, Indian to my right, ignite my inner muse and begin to flutter my wings. Ready or not, here I come, she repeats even louder. And without hesitation, I respond, ready.
Wow, I got chill bumps as you were reading that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I thought that was a little more fun. It's about creativity. I have some really heavy ones in here as well about poverty, a few about poverty, just various kinds of really social issues, but also really kind of wrapped in this idea of hope and light and healing. And so, I really feel that as human beings, we have so much more agency to do so much than we realize sometimes, right? With the talents that we have, with community being together to come up with innovative ideas, just making time for each other to talk and to learn. That's what I love about what you do. What I loved is, I do quite a few interviews for various professional things, and but they always have all of these specific questions they ask. And I loved it. It was very refreshing to get your email because you just had a few talking points. Mm-hmm. And that's it. And then you said, we're going to let it flow, right? Basically. And I love that. I think sometimes in our world, we don't leave enough for the organic, for the conversations. And yet that's so important to remember our shared humanity.
That is so true, because that's the whole point when I started this, is I wanted to be like two friends sitting down, having a cup of coffee or a glass of wine or whatever they're drinking together, and just having a conversation that, sometimes you tell your most heartfelt secret to your friends and they share their secrets. And I wanted to be, it said that there was no topic that was ever off the table for anything. I mean, I've handled racial issues. I've handled mental health issues. I want to make sure that these things are not things that hush, taboo society doesn't want to talk about. These are the things I want people to talk about, because it's only when we start talking about them can we work on the solution for them and work on erasing that stigma around all these types of things.
Yeah. Well, and the stigma is even back to homelessness, right? The stigma is just huge. And we have so many, the stereotypes that exist. There's a lot of kind of false, mythologies and stories. And we make it very hard for people to kind of ask for help and to get help, and, judging all too easy, right? And yet, it's so important that we don't forget, right, that we are all connected in ways and listen to each other and our stories. And so that's really important. And the challenging stuff, you're right. So many times I think conversations that are so essential and imperative are left out, right? Because they're uncomfortable, or because they're heavy, or because, we just don't want to say the wrong thing. I mean, there's all of these different kinds of reasons. And yet it's so important we talk about it. Even with homelessness earlier today, I was in the community talking about trafficking, sex trafficking. And we see, especially during the pandemic now coming out of it, just numbers have continued to rise. We have millions of youth, on our streets, living and needing support and resources because of all of the structural kinds of issues that we've been talking about. And it's really, it's just heartbreaking. Especially because the reality is in our communities, if we all just take some more time to invest in our youth, in our children in real ways, right? To say, I believe in you, I see you, let's build resources, physiological. I mean, think about physical needs, right? As educators, we always go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the base, we all need shelter, we need air, we need food, a safe place to sleep. These are basic, fundamental human rights. And to think millions of families and individuals and millions of children and youth are without, it is heartbreaking. And I think it is a call to all of us. It merits our attention, our immediate attention, and it merits action, right? Really mindful action in ways.
So how do you think the pandemic has affected the homeless rate?
Sure. So the pandemic has definitely magnified and grown homelessness in a number of ways. We have seen so many businesses shut down all across the landscape of the U.S. We have seen so many deaths, right? Precious lives that have been lost. And in so many cases, many were single parents who had a kid. The child is now having to be put into foster care. I mean, and there are issues where we don't have enough folks fostering. I mean, there's ripples of issues right now. Communities are dealing with. I think about the state of New York. I'm working with some schools there. Heavy issues. So many children, I mean, thousands have lost a parent, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in some cases, even when it was a two-parent or guardian household, sometimes a life was lost that was the main breadwinner, right? So what does that mean for the family? So COVID-19, medical bills. I mean, there's so many different kinds of exasperations of things that have happened. And then I keep thinking the evictions. We've been able to get moratoriums pushed, and we've been able to push it back. But again, it does not erase the fact that they are looming, that we have millions of families and large amounts of children and youth that are at the brink right now about to be displaced and add into the numbers of homelessness. So really real things. Food insecurity. During the pandemic, we saw with schools shutting down, with a lot of community centers had to shut down. Many folks could not get to food, right? To basic resources. Pantries were shut down. So lots of kinds of ripple effects, and it really affected folks on numerous levels. And we are just seeing, again, in some communities, up to 40% increases already. Mental health issues, right? You brought up mental health. It is huge. The pandemic has had devastating kinds of mental health implications, and folks have not been able to get resources and help in many cases. So you start to see all of this, right? And then on top of it, in so many cities, towns, states, we tend to criminalize homelessness as well. So if somebody is sleeping on a bench, right, instead of helping them, sometimes they're given a citation or a ticket, and then they can't pay that citation or ticket, or they're swept off and put into the woods. But then all of a sudden they do raids, right? The CDC during the pandemic, that was one thing where they said, okay, it's not safe to be doing sweeps, encampment sweeps. They still were happening in communities across the US. But all of these things, I mean, there are physical implications, social, emotional, cognitive, all of that, right? And when you think about our children and youth who are in developmental states, that is a lot. And so we have a lot of work to do across the nation. And I feel I wish I had brighter news in terms of data, but when we're looking at things, I mean, even starting to look and pull data and looking at the next 10 years, it's really, really pretty heartbreaking and distressing. And, we're at a place now, I mean, we've had COVID-19 money come in places. And, recently, I know the administration now has enlarged kind of money for certain measures that definitely outreach. But with so much growth, it's still very, very, I mean, the disparities are so wide, so wide.
So what can we do as individuals to help?
Yeah, that's an awesome question and such an important question. So I always like to say, right, there are ways for everyone to help and to get involved, to be part of the solution, right? And you have to find what you're capable of doing. So, everything helps in the sense we need people at the micro ground level who are volunteering at soup kitchens. We need people to fill the pantries, right, with items. Right now we have lines and lines in pantries, right, and not enough food to go. And I'll tell you, rural homelessness, that's a whole nother thing where there's not often even pantries there, resources there, right? So we need people to go out into the community to spread and give. Financial, even some people say, I'm so busy, right? I can't do anything, right? Well, a lot of these folks, if you're fortunate enough to be in a well-resourced situation, you can share your finances, right? So I tell them there are organizations doing this work that need support. Find your local community, like I have a mentoring program. Find, the National Coalition for the Homeless. Find places where you can actually help, right, by donating. That makes a huge difference. I think, showing up, there are mentoring programs across the U.S. There are Boys and Girls Clubs, Big Brother, Big Sister, so many different ways to get involved and to be a mentor for a youth. And we need folks to stay as well. See, so one of the things that happens often in mentoring, in so many nonprofits as well, there's kind of a rotation that happens. People come in and out because the jobs are so heavy. There's a lot of secondary trauma, just like in schools, right? We see educators just leaving. That's something we need to do a better job too, tending to secondary trauma, right? That's a whole another thing. I'm writing a book right now actually about that, healing and nourishment for educators and youth service providers. But here's the thing, for so many youth, even finding a trusting relationship can be very hard. And for so many, but the last thing we want to do in mentoring situations is perpetuate more hurt or harm, right? And so if you kind of sign up to do it and you hook up with the youth, and then life gets busy, so you drop it, right? Doesn't affect you as much, but on the other end, right, you sometimes have a child or a youth who, the heart is just, there's so many heartbreaks we can all take, right? And so we want to be very mindful in this work as well. But I think donating, I think showing up, I think volunteering, finding your low-income schools in your community and offering to help. There's so much need there. Finding local shelters and asking, what is it you need? Right? How can we help? Really interesting, socks are one of the least donated items. And it's one of the most needed in shelters for folks who are homeless. So something very simple, many schools have started to catch on to this, and I'm really proud my kids kind of helped to start it in schools that they're at, is this idea of Socktober. So taking the month of October and saying, let's turn it into Socktober and everybody donate socks. Right? Let's collect as many socks as we can. And these are things at schools that can be a lot of fun for kids, right? Kids get a lot of joy. Let's do that. And let's learn at the same time, right? What does it mean? Why are socks important? What does this mean? At the older levels, there's even needs for, we are women here, women hygiene products. They are expensive. They are not something that's donated, right? Or readily available often. And yet, when you don't have access to sanitary kinds of, ways, health, adequate ways, you end up finding other means, and people end up sick and even hurt, right? Because of it. So there's just so much, I think, building awareness, right? So having conversations like this, we need more of it. I think educating people in the community, we talked about stereotypes earlier. I think, be an upstander. When you hear people kind of stereotyping or just dehumanizing somebody, stand up, right? Remind them of the humanity of that person. Break those myths. Let them know almost 50% in the US are working multiple jobs and are in homeless situations. They are anything but lazy, right, in that sense. We have to speak up and out. And so I think, again, there's a number of ways, things that we can all do. I know during the pandemic, those who are in homeless situations were extra vulnerable. Think about our kids. It's interesting, even when the pandemic first set, in so many schools, they were starting to teach kids, the safest thing you can do, wash your hands, right? Wash your hands, keep that mask on. But so many of our children, they didn't even have access to really wash their hands, right? It's not something, a sink wasn't readily available. And so a lot of fear was set in ways, right? And so even what can we do in our community to be responsive, to make sure, if we're going to tell all our kids, right, washing hands is important, can we set up washing stations, right, in where encampments are, so kids can wash their hands? Can we get, antibacterial hand sanitizer out? Can we sew and make masks and pass them out? I think there's a lot we can do. It's just opening ourselves up to see what is the need. And then going back to what are our own capacities and resources and talents, and how can we plug into that, right? How can we plug into that?
Now, I know there's a lot of people that think, like you said, the stereotypes, they've done it to themselves, they don't want to work. They're either on drug or alcohol abuse. They have mental issues and they're like dregs in society, but that's not the truth and not the case for majority of the people. So what do you say to people that have that type of stereotype?
Yeah. So, I really try to remind them, so one of the things I do with my own students is I have my own students out in the community. So they can actually see for themselves, work with people, feel the humanity. So the next time people are saying these comments, all of a sudden they're thinking, no, right? Linda, the mom that I met who's working 2 jobs and doing her best, is anything but that. Or Steve, who I met, who's struggling with addiction and wants to get better and help and was homeless, yes, had addiction issues. But here's the thing, grew up in a family where drugs were prevalent, where he didn't have a role model, where he ended up losing his mother to opioids, where he didn't have resources to economically go check into a rehab center, right? These things where when you're more resourced, you have access to, they can start to have these different narratives in their mind. So that's one thing I definitely do, is actively get folks to even conversations and meeting people so you have a different narrative. But I also remind people, right, some of the realities, going back to remind them of some of the real statistics, to say, look, I'm in the research right now, right, doing this, and that's actually not accurate. Did you know? And we have to be, this is also interesting. I always have kind of friendly debates with colleagues in this work, because some are like, there's no room, right, for, it's kind of, we can't be tolerant of hateful kinds of depictions and words. And I fully agree. But I also say, understanding human nature, and this is probably the teacher in me, that if we go and just attack them and just often our ultimate goal doesn't get accomplished because they shut down or they resist. And then they even hang on more to whatever misconception they have, right? So if we can do it in a way where we're inviting them into conversation, where we're saying, hey, did you know, this, right? And engaging them in ways and planting these other seeds of logic, giving them stories, letting them know, right? Our own children, we think of homelessness to this day. The public tends to still think of a man with a shopping cart and a brown paper bag. That's not the reality of homelessness anymore. We have millions, families with children are the fastest growing group of the homeless population. So we have to paint those other narratives and images for them and allow them to know the complexities of situations as well, right? I think, again, people, it's kind of these oh, they're just lazy, they're on drugs. We know that's not true, right? Just from stories of folks that we're talking to. We also know that when you are down and you are facing hardship and difficulty, because of the structures and systems, it's often very hard to kind of move out of that, right? The example being what we were just talking about with criminalization, where somebody's already knocked down, and now all of a sudden we're hitting them and hitting them. Let me tell you, one of the saddest. This is very kind of interesting and super heartbreaking and distressing as well. But a young man that I met who's been having such a hard time getting a job. He's had the toughest time getting a job, and it's because he has a criminal record. Well, he grew up into homelessness when he was very young. His father was abusive. His mother died early. Father was very abusive. I mean, beat him, sexually molested him. He ended up leaving the house, right, as a runaway. Was in homeless situations. As a teenager, he was got into some trouble, right, with a robbery situation. In many states, even if they're not, we tend to give youth adult sentences. So he was kind of given an adult sentence. He was released, but had no resources, nobody to go to. So he was back in a homeless situation. He ended up where he thought nobody could see him, but he was kind of behind to the side of a building urinating because he had to pee. And he ended up getting arrested for that. And in the state that he was in, right, not giving all his details away, urinating in public is considered a sexual offense. So now people don't even realize, right, when we talk about systems and structures, so now his label says that he's a sex offender. So it is very, very hard for him to get a job. He's judged in a number of ways right away. And here's the thing, right, he was homeless. He didn't have a place to urinate. I mean, we're very fortunate when we have a bathroom we can just use. Or, I think about so many of the youth I work with. They try to go into public places and try to really hide to be able to use the bathroom to clean up, in the morning. I've been working with schools to get public showering stations and things like that. But when you don't have that, right, you have to go into a 7-Eleven or somewhere. And many places are now locking bathrooms. And when they know you're homeless, you're not allowed to use it. Right. And I understand. On the other hand, these businesses are saying we're losing business. Right. So they come at it from their perspective. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, we're all human. Right. We all have to urinate. We all have to sleep. Right. We find a bench to sleep. I mean, and I fear, again, that we are criminalizing. We are further injuring people who are already hurting, who are already suffering, who are already without basic human rights. And that's not okay, right? I think we have to do better, right? We must be better. Otherwise, and it doesn't matter, whatever faith you are, whatever, just as a human being, right? We talk about so much, even to kids, about being kind, right? Being kind, treat somebody like you'd want to be treated, be kind. When you see somebody fall, help them, pick them up. What happens? We're in a world, we're telling those messages, but we're not doing that, right? Mm-hmm. I want our rhetoric to match our actions. That's what I want.
So how can we restore their dignity? Because as being homeless people and society looks down on them, they don't have that dignity. They don't have that self-confidence and that self-esteem that a lot of people, people in general struggle with it, but their struggle has to be like 10 times as worse as ours.
It's interesting you bring that up. So this really, in academia, universities, they call it research, but for me, it's not, it's my life's work. But I've been collecting and talking to people and documenting stories and trying to learn from folks with lived experience. And so many have brought in this idea of dignity being the most important thing. And they say, and somebody even told me, this man I met said, when you lose your dignity, you lose everything, right? Everything. And he was very insistent. He refused to let people take that away, right? And tried to hold on to it. He said, they can take everything else. I might not have anything materially, but I refuse to let go. But for so many, that dignity is taken every day, right? And the way it is, it's just, again, we forget to see people as humans, right? I had one of the youngsters I work with, she even shared with me how painful it would be when they would be on the side of the road and they would have a cardboard sign and try to collect money just so they could eat, right, and have food. She had 3 younger siblings. Her mom would often work. This is what they would do to try to get some extra money in. But she said it was so painful because so many people, they either would avoid looking at them altogether and look the other way and just completely walk, right? Like, we don't see you. Or some would just fling money into their, they wouldn't come close or say hi. They would just take dollar bills and fling them. And their intention is good. They're trying to give money to somebody. But in that action, she talked about how much it hurt, right? That you're just flinging this money at me. And it was just the dignity piece, right, really came into play. And as she said, more than anything, I wish people would just see me, right? Just see me. And I think at the end of the day, as humans, we all want to be seen, right? Loved, valued, felt like we belong, right? We're inclusive in a community. And so often I think that does not happen. And so, I think, talking to people, right? Saying hello, that goes a huge way. And I understand people will say, oh, but if you say hello, you could be attacked, or it could be a violent thing, or it could be, but that's with any human being, right? I don't understand why this is depicted only on the homeless, right? When you know the nature of the homeless, it's again, these stereotypes, I think, that play. It doesn't mean that we're not safe when we go out on streets or when we're out, there are safety mechanisms in every sort of way. But come on, tell me, you're telling me this young girl with her siblings sitting on the side of the road doesn't deserve somebody to say hello, right? How are you? Conversation, right? That matters. Some of the youth I work with, we have the youth, even youth in low income situations, create hygiene and snack bags, blessing bags, right? To give out to the community. And one of the big things I told them is, let's not just put these physical items in, but I challenge them to say, I want you to also add positive affirmations, right, and love inside of those bags. And it was so touching and beautiful because the kids, they wrote the most loving messages, right? They had note cards and they put stickers and decorated with markers. And some of the kids who had been in homeless situations themselves, they said, these are things I wish someone had said to me, right? Or I wish I could have had this message. And so we took time to make all of those and put them in. And it was beautiful to watch because folks would open these bags, right? And, sometimes there were a few folks who had trouble reading as well. So when we gave them, we also kind of waited to see, and if they needed help, we could read it to them as well. But many of them, they tucked and held on to that card. And a few of them just started crying, right? They just held it and started crying. One of the women I know in our community to this day, we've done this cycle of projects so long, but her first card she still carries it around, and she's still in a homeless situation. She's been able to go into temporary shelter here and there, but I'll run into her, and the first thing she always does, she takes out that card and shows it to me. It's given her this just comfort, right, in so many ways. And I think, that at the end of the day, as human beings, there are basic needs that we all look for, right? Love, belonging, care, food, water, and we can all offer that. And I think treating people with dignity is not enough to just, give money or give, and also going into some of these root causes. I think, I think there's a difference between charity and justice, right? And charity is important. We need people to give to causes, but we also need justice so these causes don't exist, right? We need fundamental shifts and changes in things. And that, again, doesn't just happen without, as Dr. Martin Luther King put it, the tireless exertion and passion of individuals, right, coming together. That requires all of us, collective impact.
So with this collective impact, you have your Poverty and Homeless Conference. Let's talk about that real quick.
Yes, I love that. Thank you. So this really, you talk about collective impact. That is at the heart of this conference, and everybody is welcome to join. The conference brings together diverse stakeholders, teachers, school administrators, counselors, social workers, faith organizations, nonprofits, community members, parents and guardians, students. I even say children, come and learn, right? Everybody. It's really interesting. We usually do this conference in person at Stetson's campus. We bring folks together. It's a beautiful day, grounded in social justice. We work with local farmers to get our food, and it's just eco-friendly bags with resources, and really, really wonderful day. What happened is with the pandemic, last year we had the conference planned, and the day before the conference, we had speakers fly in, everything. I got word from our university president at that time that we had to cancel because of the pandemic, and the risk was high, and it was heartbreaking because we had done so much planning, but public health, takes priority. And so what we did is we are doing a virtual conference this summer on July 10th. And it's going to be virtual through Zoom. We have speakers, we have youth, we have many voices that are going to be part of this. Great information that's going to be shared. You talk about how do we educate ourselves and equip ourselves to have knowledgeable conversations. This is a really wonderful way to do it. And because it's virtual, it really opens it up, right, to anybody and everybody. In terms of registration, educators are $10 and community members are $15. But if somebody can't afford to pay the $10 or $15, they can just shoot me an email and we will make sure they can get registered for free. So happy to cover registration for any folks who need it. And so we're just really excited. It's going to be a wonderful day. We have some really great speakers. We're going to talk about our National Coalition for the Homeless. We just launched a national campaign to end homelessness. And so we're going to talk a bit about that. I'm super excited, and just, the more folks that can come out and support, the better. It really means a lot. And this conference is, we encourage folks, especially during our normal day conference. Now on July 10th, it's virtual and half a day, 9 to noon Eastern time. But during the normal conference, we go all day, and folks end up getting action plans that they develop to take back into their communities that they do. And then we also provide a number of resources for kind of ongoing. So since this, we've had food pantries started in schools. We've had weekend giveaway bags for families. We've done things over spring break like meals. We've had the shower stations, mentoring programs have grown. Giving resources like books, right? How do we get that into the hands of folks? So many kids have never owned their own book, right? And what does it mean? I mean, books have so much power. Literacy is just one of the most powerful and needed skill sets. So we really try to tackle all of this and think about sustainable, innovative solutions working together, right? That we can do. So it really is a conference of hope as well. We also make it uplifting. It's just wonderful to be in beloved community with so many folks who care.
That is so true. Now, our time is almost up. Is there one thing that you want to share before we go?
Thank you for that. I love that. There's a lot I can share, but I think I'll just end on a simple note, because I'll share to you my mom. Growing up, all of these heavy issues, it's a lot. You feel it and it's heavy, and sometimes you just break down, right? You feel like, can I do anything? And Amma would tell me a quote by Mother Teresa, and she always said this quote all the time to me. And so now today it's words that I constantly hear in the work that I do, no matter where I go. And so I'll share that quotation with everyone listening. I alone cannot change the entire ocean, but I can cast a stone across the waters to create many ripples. And these are words that I say to myself often, and I truly believe we can all cast those ripples And when we come together, I always tell people, when you come together, those ripples can become waves of goodness and love and change.
I love that. And anytime you want to come back and add more to these ripples and changes, let me know, because you're more than welcome to come back.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you. Your thoughtful questions. And you're so easy to talk with too. Oh my God, this is great. You're so good at what you do. I love this. I really enjoyed it. And I look forward to it. I would love to come back, and share at some point. Many things we can talk about, I'm sure, that we can chat about in your blog cabin.
For sure. So, Rajni, I said it right that time, didn't I?
You did. You got it.
Yay. I want to thank you for being on and for sharing about, your heart, because you could see your heart in what you were talking about. I think a couple of times, I think you almost teared up as you were talking. And I want to acknowledge you for that, because a lot of people don't, like you said, they don't see the person, the homeless person. They just see, oh, somebody wanting a handout. Well, they should go get a job. So I want to thank you for sharing about that and some of the action steps that we could actually do as individuals to help with the homeless situation. And guys, I will drop all the links for where you can buy the book of poetry, as well as if you want to grab into the conference, in the show notes. And as always, be blessed and remember, keep chatting.
I love it.